Okay, I think that's my cue to get started. My name is Dr. Seth Porter. I am the Chief Innovation Officer and Dean of the Kramer Family Library here at UCCS, and I'm really excited about this panel. I will say I know very little about water management, but that's what these great panelists are for. But I do have a really personal interest in this. I enjoy drinking water, and I'm hoping to continue drinking it as we move forward, and I think this group of panelists is going to help us be able to kind of wrap our arms around what that looks like. And so a couple housekeeping things before we get started. Each member of the panel is going to introduce themselves, tell a little bit about their subject expertise in regards to water management. And one small reminder, there's a QR code in the programs for attendees to submit questions via Microsoft Form, and I'll try to read these off. Depending on how many we have, I doubt I'm going to be able to read all of them off, but I'll try to pick what I personally think is the most interesting. So, keep them zippy, keep them interesting, and we'll try to get them read, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to our first panelist.
That's me. Am I on? I have a need to break into karaoke. My name is Scott Smith. I've been engaged in development in Colorado Springs since the early 1980s with the development of Briargate and Pine Creek. I've also been a part of the Colorado Association of Home Builders, and I've been engaged in policy discussions. I participated with the Water Congress, and I've been very interested and engaged in the development of water facilities in communities, both in the city of Colorado Springs and the counties. I enjoy getting my feet wet in streams and fly fishing and do other water activities. So it's an important resource, and it's a precious resource, and it's something we need to be paying attention to.
All right, my name is Kim Gortz. I'm the manager of our Water Resources Department in Colorado Springs Utilities. Within that division, we have our watershed planning. So we do a lot with forest management, source water protection. We have our conservation team. We have our long-range planning, our short-range kind of year-to-year annual operations of our water rights, as well as the field offices that we have in Colorado River and the Arkansas Basin, where we work with partners and others for water supply development. And I love water, I drink it too.
My name is Bart Miller, and I direct the Healthy Rivers program at Western Resource Advocates. And the organization as a whole is a regional one, a conservation group that primarily works on preventing the worst impacts of climate change. My work as a Healthy Rivers director is really about stretching our supplies farther, protecting water in streams in places like Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and elsewhere. I also love drinking water, but I also remember a colleague who said, fish need water every day, just like we do.
Hey everybody, I'm Michael Booth. I am the environment writer for the Colorado Sun, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit news website with some of the most experienced reporters in the state. Our reporters have hiked, skied, kayaked, driven, walked, flown over every square inch of the state, and we believe we're the news organization that cares more about every corner and every drop of water in the state more than any other. I spend a lot of my time on water. We have two other reporters at least who spend all of their time on water, and all of us touch on it very frequently. We have a series going on right now about the Arkansas River, following up from the very top of the headwaters that I got to hike with our photographer below the Climax mine all the way out to the state border and everywhere along the way. So I hope you will go to coloradosun.com and check out that particular series, but also our past coverage on water. Since I'm the last one in the row, I'll just start the discussion with a couple of numbers that I think are important for people to know as they talk about water in Colorado. First number is 100th meridian. East of the 100th meridian, it rains and snows enough to grow crops without irrigation. So in Springfield, Illinois, in corn country, it rains about 38 inches a year. West of the 100th meridian, which runs through Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, South Dakota, North Dakota, and well east of Colorado, it does not rain enough to grow crops or supply humans without moving water around all over the place. And that's why we're here, because Humans in Colorado have had to move water around ever since we started moving here in big groups. 80% of the available water flowing in Colorado is available and falls west of the divide. 80% of the people who need that water or need it for agriculture live east of the divide. That's why we have to move everything around. 85%, another number, of the available water in Colorado goes to agriculture. And only about 7 or 8% goes to urban use for watering our lawns and flushing the toilet and taking showers and running industry. So 85% of it is in agriculture, and if you are looking for savings or looking for water, as Colorado Springs and Pueblo and Denver and the northern counties are all doing, you tend to go where the water is, and right now it's in agriculture. Bart works a lot on Colorado River issues, and you've heard a lot about the fact that there's not enough water in the river now for the 40 million people who depend on it west of the divide. When the Colorado River was first divided up, they divided it on the basis there were 16 million acre feet of water available in a given year. That happened to be a marking year that was a lot wetter than it's been ever since then. Climate change and other factors and drought have taken about 20% of the available water out of the Colorado River Basin. And so therefore, there's only in a drought year about 12 million acre feet available for Colorado, Nevada, Arizona, California, and Utah. So that's where the rub is. That's what we're fighting over. One more number that I'll mention, talking about development and housing development. One of the stories we wrote about 2 years ago was Arvada changing its tap fee. If you all don't know what a tap fee is, when a developer builds a housing unit, they need to pay a tap fee to the local government to hook into the water supply, and often the sewage tap fee is included in the same amount. Arvada more than doubled its tap fee to now $55,000 for one unit, for one house. So when you look at the report that was handed out today that you all picked up, and it talks about median housing costs in Colorado being about $600,000 right now, give or take. A big chunk of that now in new developments is going toward just your water tap fee.
Great, thank you. So I think that covers a lot of the big picture issues, but one of the things I wanted to make sure that I'm sure everybody here has concerns about is, do we have enough water, not just for today, but for tomorrow's growth, for sustainable growth long term? And if not, what's that limit? So I'm just going to throw it up, and y'all can take it as you will.
I guess I'll start local. I think from Colorado Springs, I was doing a little research, probably like you like to do, but I was looking actually at our 1996 water resource plan. And in 1996, our demand was bumping around 90,000 acre feet. So again, numbers, an acre foot covers a water over an acre of 12 inches deep. So you generally have today 3 to 4 single family units that can survive on that acre foot. But in the 90s, we were using a lot more. I mean, we've actually reduced that demand over 20% over the last 20 or so years, because now we're hovering around 70,000 acre feet. And so when you looked at our gallons per capita per day, back then, we were around 136 gallons per capita per day, and now we're at 77. And so what that has actually afforded us is we do have kind of room within our system in order to serve the demands today. And so if you talk about today, we walked out the door today, risks didn't change, things didn't change, we would actually we have enough, right? We have enough, we have even some room to grow. And I always like to say there's an and to that. The and being, what is the vision for how we move forward? I can imagine some scenarios of water use that we wouldn't have enough. I can imagine a lot of scenarios that we do have enough. And then I also say we have to continue to invest in the infrastructure and the water supply that we do need for the city and how it grows. I mean, you talked about 85% of that being in ag. Agriculture is also about 14% of the gross domestic product of Colorado, where the Front Range cities and a lot of the the growth, the services, the technology, the things that are happening on the Front Range are about 86% of that gross domestic product. And so, you know, we are in an era of reallocation. So, you know, some of us like that, some of us don't like that. And how we do it really matters. And so, do we have enough? I would say depends on what we want to do with what we have. And how are we going to balance that across all of the water users?
I want to let you know, I wrote down your number about you guys are using 20% less water, but you have 96%, I think that's the number, more population than about 20 years ago. So you're serving a lot more people using even less water.
That is correct. And I think going into the future is like we want to assess the values of the water to the other values that our city leadership has to prioritize, housing, jobs, and all that. And how do we even use water as a criteria in those decision making is really important. And as a planner, I'm not an engineer or a lawyer. I actually am an urban and regional planner. I like to ask those questions on like, what is that vision? What are the goals? Is the water the criteria that's important? Is it most important? Is it least important? And those really will drive how we will manage our water into the future, and do we have enough?
I'll build a little bit on that in that my answer to the question is, yeah, in many cases, we do have enough, certainly looking at over the next 5 or 10 or 15 years. Not every city has managed to do what Colorado Springs has as far as keeping total water use the same or lower. Denver, as an example, has kept it more or less flat over the last 40 years. But there's a lot of growing parts of Colorado that haven't been able to do that. They're putting new demands on the system. And so growth does have an impact. You're either going to have to reallocate it out of an existing use, like agriculture, purchasing that water, or you're going to have to build a new project. And there are plenty of water projects that have been built. There's fewer, but there's still a few new ones. And those have impacts on local communities, on the rivers themselves, on habitat. So short answer is, yeah, there's water, but as we build, as we continue to grow, we're going to have some impacts and have to make some pretty hard decisions about that. But I think Colorado Springs has done a good job in helping bend the curve.
I think it's important to go back and analyze how we've been able to reduce that water consumption on a per capita basis. I think it's important to note that several years ago, water, and it still is this case today, water is still relatively inexpensive to the average customer in Colorado Springs. And it used to be a lot more inexpensive. So we built a landscape environment in Colorado Springs that was very, very thirsty. And so that took a lot of that capacity. And over the last several years, we've seen a big push towards conservation. We've seen a whole lot of conservation of water in new development, water-friendly appliances, and also kind of paying attention to how much we're spending on irrigation. And then on top of that, other things that we can do to really, preserve our water is reuse, where we can take the water, especially from the west slope, use that to extinction, and also take a look at other ways that we can reuse water and be a lot more conservative and efficient in how we use it.
Scott, I was going to ask whether the consumer expectation has changed. When they come looking for a house, do they still expect the massive lawn where their kids can play their own soccer game on it? Have they heard all of this news about the fact that there's not enough water for all the 7 states in the basin, and we need to share, and we need to reduce home water use and lawn water use? What do you think? Has that changed as well?
If only new home buyers were that sophisticated, we'd have a whole lot less problems. But I think that the expectation has definitely changed. I think the expectation is that you would have a play area somewhere near where you live, but not necessarily a giant backyard. And as we've seen with the cost of building housing, the lot sizes are shrinking, so there's a lot smaller yards. There's a lot more emphasis on really friendly landscaping. And I think that one of the benefits is when we shift our kind of the green spaces off to metro districts or even to the city, they're really focused on water savings and being very efficient in water use. So we can kind of have our cake and eat it too to some extent. But we also are seeing a lot more artificial turf and things like that going into it. So I do think the expectations have changed.
Can I add a little something? One thing is we reuse our water 100%, so there's some diversification maybe in how we reuse, but as far as what we do, it is already being done and to the max that we can do it. And then I think from the homeowners, what we're seeing is there are a lot of folks interested in perhaps converting their landscapes. We have changed our water-wise rules to 3 days a week watering. I think our programs are even trying to maybe drive that even a little bit down to a 2-day a week watering. What you see is the new homes going in also have irrigation systems, and they tend to set it and forget it. So there is a lot of education to be done for conservation even in these new housing units. And we've passed, turf limitations in these new homes as well. And so I don't think they are getting, the market is not, the regulation is not there for them to have the large play lawn and rolling green grasses in their backyard. So it's a lot of education about trying to build the proper landscape, the low water use. I am also a landscape architect by training, and it's like there is beautiful landscapes, and I think showing those at, say, our conservation center, building that knowledge base, your neighbor putting in native turf grass, is showing the community that we can have very beautiful landscapes, green spaces that we need for our mental health and well-being as well, on a minimum amount of water.
So you mentioned a few potential strategies on conservation as well as potential hard decisions in the future in 10, 15, 20 years. What are other strategies to maintain the water resources that we have as well as potential hard decisions? And then I want to throw it up. We have a few good questions from the crowd, so I want that follow-up and then go to the crowd.
Everyone looks at me first, so I don't know. Does anyone else want to start the question, answer the question? I mean, I think there's lots of strategies out there. I think to go to the reuse question, maybe, we are working a lot with our regional entities at this time because a lot of them are on groundwater, and you've talked about the cities kind of growing on other water resources and aren't quite as maybe fortunate as Colorado Springs has been with our investments over time in our infrastructure. And so that reuse is very important when you're on groundwater. And so we're actually looking at working with, some of you might have seen in the newspaper, the Loop Authority, other regional entities that has grown on an indirect potable reuse project where they can actually recapture a lot of those reusable return flows from the groundwater that they don't necessarily have access to or easy access to today. And really that's starting to build that resiliency. And I think that's one of those strategies. It's not only helping to conserve the water, it's helping to do reuse and build some resiliency across not just Colorado Springs, but El Paso County.
Yeah, I'd answer that question. One of the most effective things that we've seen over the last couple of years is both a focus on turf, because that's more than half of the water that's used in the municipal sector is outdoor grass. And much of that doesn't even get used by kids playing soccer. It's just there in the median, or it's in a place that no one can get to except for the person who has to mow it. So focusing on that is important, but I think even taking a step back from that, the single most important thing we've been working on for several years is the integration of land and water use planning, because you can make a lot of smart decisions early in the process, all the way back to master plans and zoning and landscape regulations. Like all of those, there's a bunch of processes in the development, phasing of development, and that's where you can make smart decisions. And it makes sense to spend that time. I know it's seen as regulation or some forms to fill out, but I think because, as Michael said, new tap fees can be as much as $40,000 or $50,000 or $60,000 per tap fee for a new unit. That's just like one housing unit. It makes sense if water's that valuable. We should pay attention to that and do it from the very beginning of the planning process.
I was hoping Kim and Scott would talk about, speaking of master planning, development, obviously big annexation controversy in Colorado Springs area, and wondering how much you think that had to do with things like planning for water, or worried about dividing the area's resources too thinly in the future, and where that's going to go next.
Well, that is a great question. The question is it the concern about water, or is it this growing NIMBYism that we're experiencing, where we have kind of a growing, interest in slowing or stopping the growth altogether, and is using water just a kind of a cudgel to try to stop things and slow things down. I mean, realistically, we're currently, I think there's about 7,000 babies are born in El Paso County every year, and we're only losing about 4,000 people a year. So I think we have a net natural population growth of 3,000, and if we decide to stop growing, I guess that means we need to export our human capital somewhere else and make it somebody else's problem. So I think we have an obligation to make sure that we are taking care of our own. And I mean, obviously we have in-migration, and that's been great for a long time, but I'm really concerned that the cost of housing, you talk about a $55,000 tap fee, you're talking about a lot of people that cannot afford a house now. And Colorado Springs has what we would consider to be a relatively low tap fee, about $12,000, $13,000. But the things that you don't see on the other side of that is with a lot of those tap fees, like up in Arvada, I would guess that all of the transmission and distribution lines are included in that fee. Where in Colorado Springs, we have kind of more of a strategy where we require the land developers to put those major infrastructure items in place, make all the distribution systems. Now that's all, Colorado Springs, we work hand in hand with Colorado Springs Utilities, so those plans are all approved by, and in fact, for the most part, designed by Colorado Springs Utilities, but they are installed by the development community. So the overall cost of providing water to a house is well over $30,000 per house.
Yeah, can I ask a follow-up on that? So you mentioned that Arvada is using, and they're pricing it in with that $40,000 or $50,000 fee. So are housing developers also doing that, but it's just not labeled as that within the cost of the
It just depends on
new
how
housing?
you do it.
Yeah.
So
But would you say that's a common?
Well, I mean, we actually have something that's called a water resource fee that's also collected during a tap fee. So the tap fee collects for certain aspects of buying into the system, and others, the water resource fee is more of a forward-looking approach where we have certain capital investments in water supply that we've identified at a certain cost, and then the water resource fee is kind of calculated based on that to help collect something to look forward and potentially make those investments for what that growth will need in the future. And I think to kind of go to your question about the annexation, Colorado Springs is a provider of that service. It's really our city leaders that weigh, the costs and the policies and all the, needs for whether you annex infill, like enclaves, or you annex outside, and extend the border. And again, as a water resource planner, we look at that as to say, well, with that demand, how does that maybe add to the additional build-out need of the city? I think where, I think I just lost my thought, but I think
You had said you have enough water now.
Right.
Well, I guess the question would be, would you have had enough water for that annexation if it was built out? Or would you have to make a plan to acquire more water somewhere?
So, I mean, first of all, a municipality can't go out and develop an exorbitant amount of water to potentially serve vacant acres. We have something called two things. First come, first serve policy that we actually adopted in the 70s when we had a fairly serious drought facing us and we had growth pressure. The first come, first serve policy says we don't reserve for vacant acres, right? Once you buy a tap, we will serve you. But until you do that, we will do our best to develop and serve the city and the future city needs, but we don't guarantee it. So that's the first, I guess, stopgap.
Is that common in Colorado, or is that only specific to Colorado Springs?
That's Colorado Springs, and I don't know if others generally have that type of policy. The second part is, when we develop a supply and we go through the water court process, once you start to divert and use, you have to put it to beneficial use. So we cannot develop 30,000 acre feet and just sit on it and wait for that development to happen. I mean, as everyone's noticed, the economy can go up and down. Housing then goes up and down. And we can't just develop water and have it sit there hoping that the development is going to happen. So we have two, I think, pieces to that puzzle that are very important for when we actually look at growth and do we annex. It's like I said, right now we have a nice, I would say, I'm going to just say buffer or runway. But if we have certain risks that are realized, that we are more extreme than we've planned for, if we want to develop certain water uses faster than others, right? You know, we have to look at it from a planning perspective of keeping up with the rate and the timing of that demand, and not so specifically about what demand it is or where it is located within the city.
We also have a new ordinance that just passed a couple years ago, too, for new annexations that specifically have to look at the amount of buffer that Colorado Springs has for water. So you have to take a look at what the current water usage is and make sure that that new development would not impact 128% of the current firm water usage. So that's another important consideration.
Yeah, and I think we looked at that. That's 128% of our 5-year weather normalized current demand. I almost have it memorized. And plus the annexations demand would have to be no more than what our system can be serving, which is 95,000 acre feet. Again, that's kind of is really to just let our leadership kind of sit back and say, well, do we have the right buffer we need? And again, you bring on lands, there's no guarantee that they would be able to develop it, but the location where they develop, the rate in which they develop, are you getting the commercial, residential, all those things, those pieces that you need and the priorities to fit along with that future obligation potentially for us to go out and try to develop that supply? That's what that's really supposed to do, is help them think through what that impact could be.
Thank you. So I want to move to a question from the crowd, and this is something that we've hit on a little bit, but specifically, why has Colorado Springs seen better water conservation than Denver or other cities in the state? Is it regulations? Is it incentives? Is it rebates? Is it better public management?
I mean, that's a great question. So I think regulation is one way to kind of get conservation, but I think regulation is one thing that Colorado Springs doesn't want to necessarily be a heavy hand in regulation. So that means that we have a lot of consumers out there that are, I guess, making conscious decisions to conserve. We actually have about 33,000 taps that don't water outside. Or they're a deficit irrigation. And really what that means, and we even look, like, is this low-income neighborhoods? Where is this really happening? And it's all over. There's no economic, divide on who's really not watering or who's underwatering. And so it's kind of like these choices that people make. And I think we're trying to educate on, well, we don't also want all of our large trees to die, or we don't want rockscapes and heat island and all these other related impacts that happen from completely eliminating outdoor irrigation. But how do we spend the time to build these green spaces that people do use? Like, I like to go out with my coffee mug, and sit on my porch and watch the trees grow. And I think everybody should be able to have that opportunity. And so it's really kind of that balance. And so conservation is important to our community, and I think they're showing it by how they use the water.
I think Colorado Springs Utilities did a really great job with public relations and kind of changing the culture around conservation in Colorado Springs. So I think that could be a big part of it, which is, the average citizen, the average user, gets with the program and really understands the importance of conservation and has done a great job.
I'd point out that we did a report 20 years ago looking at cities across the southwestern U.S., and Colorado Springs wasn't in that survey. We tried to get the information, but they felt like they didn't want to share it at that point. But it's funny, when the report came out, the very next year I saw presentations. because Colorado Springs was doing pretty well, like on the scale of per capita water use across the region. Colorado Springs already in like 2004 was doing a pretty good job. But I think so it's probably a combination of things. I imagine it's something about residents and having kind of the ethic of, I live in the West, I live in a desert. But it's also smart policy choices too. I mean, I think recycled water, as an example, there's probably not a lot of public outcry for that by individuals, but the city can make, or the utility can make a decision. We're going to use recycled water, and we have resources. We have Trans Mountain water or irrigation water that we've purchased that we can reuse to extinction. And so that's an important choice as far as when you build out your water portfolio, making those kinds of decisions.
I would also point out that even though water agencies are doing this partly because it's the right thing to do, but they're also doing it because they're being forced to by a combination of the power of environmental groups, the power of water courts, the power of other U.S. District Court reviews. If you want to build a big new water project, whether it's a reservoir or a pipeline in Colorado these days, you have to often prove, at least to the environmental community that will file suit if you don't, that you have done everything you can to get that water through conservation before you get it by damming up another river or buying it from farmers and transferring the right in water court. And if you think this is all abstract talk and it doesn't have impact in the real world, there's an enormous dam that is going up at a cost of almost $600 million in Boulder County that Denver Water owns, Gross Reservoir. They wanted to double the size of the dam in order to hold more water behind the dam. And a judge this year ordered them to stop construction when they were about 2/3 of the way through it. They had poured millions of tons of concrete already, and they stopped construction because a U.S. district judge said they had not done enough in getting the permit to guarantee that they had gone through all the climate change reviews, all the environmental reviews, and that the status of that dam is that Denver's now allowed to continue building for safety reasons, but they may never be able to fill it. Right now, the judge's decision is that they cannot fill it, this new space that they're building. So these things have big impacts. Another project that's on hold right now is the now $2.7 billion Northern Integrated Supply Project in Northern Colorado that we've written about a lot. It was moving forward, it had been under permitting reviews and legal cases for years and years and years, and then was finally moving forward with its final permit. And then its biggest customer, Fort Collins Loveland, pulled out, said the water had gotten too expensive and they didn't want to be participating anymore. Now they've lost another smaller town, and NISP has said that they're going to put the whole thing on pause while they try to figure out whether it's a viable project or not.
Yeah, that's a good point. Though our organization has not been part of those lawsuits, we were part of commenting on the original proposals. And you're right, Michael, that these are expensive. They are 30 or 40 years from project inception to getting a federal permit if you get one, right? And there's more examples now than there were about projects that did spend a lot of time and effort and never got built, like Homestake 2. That was a project that would have been in the headwaters of the Eagle, but didn't happen. So I think that cost factor, like if you look at a $2 or $3 billion project, it's not just Colorado, it's folks in Nevada and elsewhere, right? These projects are super expensive.
I can tell you I'm living the dream right now.
So, yeah.
I mean, we're working on permitting our own reservoir enlargement, right? I mean, we started in 2018.
Montgomery?
In Montgomery, yeah, but I mean, the inception of that was well beyond. I mean, it was actually an inception when it was built in the 50s that it would eventually be enlarged. But in 2018 or 1920, we have spent a year working with the federal agencies on that conservation kind of issue in and of itself. Like, we had to change the way we do our demand forecasting. We moved to a land use, water use kind of demand forecasting. We had to prove purpose and need, and the need was driven by, are you guys efficiently using your water, and could you do more in order to use what you have versus going for new? And so the bar is high as far as we have to have responsible use, we have to have efficient use, and we have to be reasonable. And they do compare us against other parts of the state and the West as to, are we being reasonable in our use? We have passed that test.
Can I jump in just real quick? Because
that low flush
Yeah.
toilet you may not like that much in your house. Multiply that times 300,000 across Colorado Springs and El Paso County, And that adds up to the kind of savings that are now being demanded.
Yeah, one of the points I wanted to jump in and ask a few follow-up questions on is specifically you've talked about the Constitution and some of the frameworks around water usage in the state. And from what I understand, Colorado is one of the only states with a dedicated water court system written into its Constitution. And so some of what you discussed was how your decision-making frameworks kind of follow off that. What else would you say? How does that shape the design of the water systems in this state?
Yeah, I think I'd answer that. So yeah, Colorado's fairly unique. California has a hybrid system, but a lot of other states in the West don't have a water court-driven system. And what it means is it's expensive to go get new water rights or to change them. Going to water court with your experts and your attorneys adds to the years you're involved in, whether it's a federal lawsuit that you're fighting or just in the state water court system. The interesting thing is having a water court means all the folks who are in the same region can object. They can get involved in the case. They can say, hey, don't harm my water right just because you want to have a new one. So it provides some certainty. The good part of this system is that after you spend all that money and do all this legwork, you can end up with a pretty clear picture of what your water right is, what year it's dating to, right? So the Montgomery project might date back to the 50s or whenever it was first envisioned. But there's all these other water rights that'll come after, and the question is like how, were those people, do they have any reason to object? If the people that were there earlier, if they have any reason to object, you can avoid, or you're forced to show that you're not going to injure those other water rights that are preceding you. The last piece I'd mention is the downside of the water court system. It goes really slowly, and it also, if you're interested in environmental values, like what happens with the rivers in Colorado really didn't start getting water rights of their own until about 50 years ago. And so it's imagine if you're running a 4-lap race, the folks who wanted to protect rivers they had to stand at the starting line for about 2 of those laps, and they still have to run 4 of them. So water rights for rivers are really junior. They came along more recently, and as a result, when it's a really dry year, a lot of those stream flows for environment don't get met. Right, the folks who came around in the 1870s or the folks who came around in 1920, they have water rights that'll be in priority and they'll get met. So that's a challenge. I think other states that don't have quite so rigid a water rights system actually have a little more flexibility on meeting environmental and other needs.
Yeah, so I'm sure some of you kind of maybe know all the adages about, water rights and things like that. But I mean, first in time, first in right. I mean, when people moved west, they started settling on, the rivers on the east side or the west side of the state. And those some of those agricultural uses are fairly senior. Municipalities started growing later, and those water rights are fairly junior. I mean, Colorado Springs water rights are actually fairly junior in the actual basins in which we divert. But the thing about the water rights is they are property rights. So people have bought these, they've used them, they've developed them, and they can sell them at some point in the future. And so the water court is also set up that if, say, municipal buys an agricultural water right and goes through a change case to make that a municipal use, it gives people the opportunity to, speak up, and it's there to prevent injury to the other senior water users in the river. And so, the water court system does influence the strategy in which you potentially are gonna develop water supplies and or manage water within the basin, within the state. And it is a long process, and somewhat it's a process that results in maybe more mitigation and other things that you have to do in order to fully develop your water right. I think even now, though, if you have a full water right and you go to fully utilize it and continue to develop, the floor changes on you. You have to all of a sudden mitigate for something that you necessarily didn't have to 50 years ago. And some of those rights do get eroded over time, and that becomes an expensive proposition as well, to just even fully utilize what you have entitled to you. Or another event comes in, or another water right is purchased that could potentially erode what you've been kind of used to doing with your water rights and operating them for the last 50 or 100 years. So, you know, the water rights are very complex. They make everything more complex. It does change the strategy on how you may do your future development, but there's always this protection component that comes with the water rights that we have to do in order to even just continue to serve the population that we have today.
I think, Kim, you probably know this way better than I do, but there's an opportunity with the agricultural water that I think CSU's done some stuff recently where, you know, basically with water rights, you need to put it to beneficial use to use it. And that gives a kind of a strange incentive to like wastewater in a lot of cases in agriculture. And there's an opportunity for Colorado Springs Utilities to go and partner with some farmers and purchase a portion of their water rights in exchange for helping them make more efficient irrigation systems that actually make them more productive.
When you say there is an incentive to waste water, what's an example of that? Is it that inefficient irrigation? Or is it specific choices just to pour it down the drain?
You need to put it to beneficial use, which kind of like drives flood irrigation and other practices, just because you don't want to lose your water rights, so you use it.
Well, and I don't know if you have other questions where you want to talk. We want to talk about like kind of what we're doing.
Well, we do have 10 minutes left, and we have a few questions from the crowd.
Okay, then I'll let.
So let's make sure we have a moment to get to the questions from the crowd. So there's a bunch of different questions pretty much on the same topic. I would say about 60% of the questions that have been given to me by the crowd are on the same topic. And they basically come down to, how can we incentivize both the urban planning of the city, the housing, and try to emphasize to the community that it's better to build densely and build up and make sure the city is designed that rather than continuing the ongoing urban sprawl that is very clear in Colorado Springs. So how can we, in regards from a water rights and a water management perspective, try to, number one, impact housing affordability as well as the water management and the water rights? And you all have mentioned a few things, for example, making sure there's one urban park for a neighborhood rather than, having a big yard for each house. So those kind of things.
I mean, there's some recent legislation over the last few years in which the state is wanting more comprehensive planning that has kind of a water supply planning component to it. That includes, understanding what the water needs are, as well as how do you kind of look at water as far as smart growth, and how that's defined. Is generally they are trying to direct folks to more infill, to more density, to less urban sprawl. And so there is kind of the state level is pushing down some of those goals and objectives, and then the municipalities are to look at the local needs and that. And so from Colorado Springs Utilities, we're actually supporting some of the work that the city's doing through their annexation plan updates, eventually a comprehensive plan update, to really what is those goals, what are the community goals and priorities. I think water is just one piece in that equation. And you really have to ask the community when you're adopting plans like that. And when we adopt our next integrated water resource plan, we will ask, we're doing a study right now on kind of that land use range and what does it look like. I mean, I know what 1,000 acre feet can serve, right? It's like you can get about, 2,700 multifamily units or, 400 or so single family units. You can have 400 suburban commercial like Academy Boulevard, or over 2,700 taps down like on Tejon, which is kind of a mixed-use, multi-purpose commercial and living area. But I don't make the decision. It's like, how do we want to put water in that value statement of what do we want to look like as we move forward? And then I think that will get reflected in some of those comprehensive plans and master plans as to, these are the types of goals we need as our community grows.
To specifically answer your question, it's happening. I mean, just due to the cost of housing, density is going up. And probably one of the biggest things that's preventing the development community from building more density is the construction defects litigation environment in Colorado, which is something that's been a problem for the last 30 years. And the costs of litigation are so high to build owner-occupied high density that it just doesn't get built. So what we're seeing is apartments. So you've got a choice now of high-density single-family housing or for-rent apartments. And we really need to solve that problem in Colorado. It's been a problem for a long, long time. There have been some little changes and tweaks to the legislation the last few years, but it's not going to make a wholesale change.
Oh, I would just mention that another way to help convince people that we need to move in that direction, it's not necessarily high-density apartment buildings, but the way some of the newer communities are being built. Painted Prairie in Aurora is one example of plan, and I believe it's Stroh Ranch in Douglas County that's also doing a lot with developers to try to cut down on the amount of water being used per unit. If you go to Painted Prairie, the houses it looks like a suburban neighborhood in some ways, but the lawns are pretty small. But every house looks out upon a significant, either a pocket park or a significant kind of regional park for the neighborhood, where it's not necessarily your yard where your kids are going to play, but all I have to do is cross a quiet street and get into a much bigger park, and the turf in that park is only for the actual playing surface, and around the edges is a xeriscaped or low water garden and playgrounds. And that's one way developing could look. I think people are going to have to look at this very carefully on new developments such as the new Bronco Stadium. That neighborhood is very much underparked at the moment, lots lacking in green space, meant to be high density because it's right on the RTD rail line and right on the edge of the city. And so there's an opportunity to make high density housing, but that also has access to public spaces that are green and appealing to people.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is I think that talking about water and land use integration, you can't just get to high-density housing through a water lens, because you could have very low water use. Even if you've got fairly large lot, if a lot of that's in xeric, which is great as far as water use, it doesn't necessarily mean you've got a high density of housing. But I think there are examples of incentivizing through the tap fees structure. It might incentivize smaller units or units that will use less over time. But it feels like it's a land use and zoning issue just as much as it is a water issue to talk about incentivizing the more dense growth.
That's great. So we're coming up on the end. I want to make sure I give the panelists about 2.5 minutes, split between everybody. Is there anything you wanted to make sure that we touched on today that we did not get a chance to talk about that you feel like is really vital?
Well, I think I just have a cough, so I can't wrap it up.
We can give you a break. We'll give you a break. Come back. I'll do briefly a touch on something we heard in the keynote about AI and data centers. Data centers are fast growing across the country, and we just, Western Resource Advocates put out a report just about a month ago, kind of looking at the impacts of new data centers in our western states, both as to their energy demands and their water demands. And the energy ones are actually even bigger, like it's having a dramatic impact on load growth, right? So how much electricity is needed, pretty stunning. And so a lot of electric utilities are having to say, well, yeah, we thought we had this kind of plan, and now we've got to meet this kind of demand. But I think on the water side, significant growth there too. Across the region, we could see something like 56,000 acre feet a year by 2030. That's enough water for, 300 and 350,000 folks. And 5 years later, we could be looking at even more like the 90,000 acre feet by 2035. So there are trade-offs about how you cool those data centers. That's the whole thing. Water is used to cool both on site, but also the electricity demands also involve water, right? So the choice you make for how your electricity is being generated, if you're using coal or natural gas, you're using water in that process, whereas renewables don't have the same kind of water demand. So it kind of hits water from both on-site use as well as the choice of electricity. And I'll just wrap with saying that's, as I think our keynote said, it's not going away. AI is not going away. Data centers are not going away. So we have to think about how we can shape that growth, where it happens, what kind of incentives or disincentives the communities may end up putting in place. I think three pieces I'll leave with: transparency about data, about water use. Like, don't let it be a secret. These are large industrial users. They should be reporting their water use. And some sort of imposition or at least best management practices, some standards of some kind on efficiency. And then I think communities can, or water utilities can, generate policies that are specifically targeted towards these large industrial users. So they can be creative about that. Again, it's not to stop this from happening, it's to shape it so we have a water footprint that's manageable.
I would talk a little bit more about farmers, and just as people listen to this debate over the next few years, I'm the one who threw out the 85% agriculture figure. Did not mean that to be an insult or a challenge to farmers. It's just an observation. If you think about it from a farmer's point of view and a farm community's point of view, the people of Otero County don't want to see, as a group, all of the land dried up in that county and taken out of farming, because it's their way of life. It's a huge part of their economy and a huge part of their culture. And as individuals, whether you're in Otero County or any other counties along the Arkansas, that water right is the most valuable thing you've got. Farming is a very tough business, but if you know that sometime in the future, when you're trying to leave a legacy for your children or your grandchildren, and they don't want to take up farming, and you know that Colorado Springs or Pueblo or Denver are going to pay you $20,000 an acre foot for your water right, that's the most valuable thing you've got. And so you want to make sure that the courts help you keep the right to that, and that you're treated fairly, both individually and as a group. And other states are wasting a lot more water than we are. A huge amount of our Colorado River water that falls on our beautiful mountains and then goes downriver ends up growing alfalfa in the desert of Arizona, which is then sent to Texas to feed dairy cattle, or Saudi Arabia to feed dairy cattle. Is that the most efficient use of everybody's water? A lot of it goes all the way to California, to the Imperial Valley and Central Valley, to grow the winter vegetables that we buy at King Soopers all throughout the year. So keep in mind how the agricultural system fits into all this, because I think it's really important.
Okay, so we're well past time. I want to make sure you all have an opportunity to talk for sure. Let's just try to keep it tight.
I'll keep it really tight. I just wanted to say that the development and housing industry is very committed to water conservation. Obviously, making sure that we're conscious of water conservation is going to lead us to be more productive and successful in the future. We work hand in hand with Colorado Springs Utilities and others to make sure we're providing those facilities high quality and very efficient. So we're engaged, and we're committed, and we're invested.
So, I mean, I think I have one of the best jobs in the state. I think it's a very challenging problem to address. How do we manage our resources with the pressures that we have from growth, from the environment and all that? I mean, I also get to talk to a lot of people. So, I talk to people who moved here because that's where the job was, and that's, they brought their family to Colorado Springs to be able to work in the medical industry. I also get to talk to farmers who, want to have potential to pass their farm on to their children without the water being such a barrier to entry for the young farmers that are coming. I talk to people who want water for their rivers so they can float or fish. And, it's not that, the municipality comes in and we're here to just grab it all and, everyone else be damned. It's where we're trying to be a cooperative water management, right? I think that's really the era that we are moving into, and it's going to take some give and take. Not every farm or not every corner of every farm might be irrigated in the future, but if the municipalities want to invest in that future, that can take technology, that can be trying to open up markets, that can be trying to save that productivity even in the face of less water. And those are the dreams and the visions I like to talk about. And then when I have a bunch of people who want to sit down and actually talk about it in that way, that's exciting, and that is something that I think our future will unfold to be.
Great, so I want to thank the panelists for donating their time. We appreciate you. That was really interesting. Thank you.